In the 1970s, our grandmothers knew how to make Christmas morning special. Their work in the kitchen didn't just feed the family. It created breakfasts so incredible the smell alone could wake you up, breakfasts that have been lost to time.
The second dish of this demonstration is called cottage pie. We do start off rather as we did with the other one.
These 30 forgotten Christmas breakfasts from the 1970s might sound like too much work today, but they carried families through tight budgets, early mornings, and beyond. Let's rediscover forgotten Christmas breakfasts from the 1970s that have disappeared. Walk into Grandma Helga's Wisconsin kitchen on Christmas morning 1972 and watch her slicing day-old stolen bread into thick slabs. She'd bought the stolen from the German bakery on Christmas Eve, and by morning it was perfect, slightly stale, dense, studded with candied fruit and almonds. She'd whisk 6 eggs with heavy cream and a splash of vanilla, then soak each slice until it was soaked through but not falling apart. The slices hit the hot buttered griddle with a sizzle, cooking until golden and crispy on the outside, custardy on the inside. She'd dust them with powdered sugar and serve them with real maple syrup. The Stolen's fruit and nuts caramelized in the pan, turning into pockets of sweetness. It cost about $1.50 to make and fed 8 people. It tasted like Christmas in every bite. Stand in Grandma Ruth's Vermont farmhouse kitchen on December 25, 1974, and watch her stirring a pot of cornmeal mush at 5 a.m. She'd pour yellow cornmeal into boiling salted water, stirring constantly with a wooden spoon for 20 minutes until it thickened into a smooth, creamy porridge that pulled away from the sides of the pot. She'd pour it into a loaf pan, let it cool and firm up, then slice it into thick rectangles. The slices got fried in butter until they were golden and crispy on both sides, with edges that shattered like glass when you bit into them. She'd serve them with maple butter she'd made by whipping real maple syrup into softened butter until it was fluffy and sweet. The mush cost 15 cents to make and fed 10 people. It tasted earthy and slightly sweet, with a corn flavor that was deeper and more satisfying than any pancake. The crispy exterior gave way to a soft, creamy interior that soaked up the maple butter like a sponge. Cornmeal mush disappeared by 1982 when instant oatmeal packets hit grocery stores, and nobody wanted to stand at the stove stirring for 20 minutes when Quaker oats took 2 minutes in the microwave. Walk into Grandma Dolly's Tennessee kitchen on Christmas morning, 1976, and smell the sausage gravy bubbling on the stove. She'd brown a pound of Jimmy Dean breakfast sausage, then sprinkle flour directly into the grease and stir it into a roux. She'd pour in cold whole milk slowly, whisking constantly until the gravy thickened into a pale, peppery sauce studded with crumbles of sausage. Meanwhile, she'd make biscuit dough, flour, lard, baking powder, and press it into a waffle iron instead of rolling it out. The waffles came out crispy on the outside, fluffy on the inside, with deep pockets perfect for holding gravy. She'd pile 3 biscuit waffles on each plate and smother them in sausage gravy. It cost $2 to make and fed 12 people. The gravy was rich, peppery, savory, with little bursts of sausage in every bite. The biscuit waffles were buttery and tender, soaking up the gravy without getting soggy. This breakfast disappeared in the mid-1980s when Pillsbury started selling frozen biscuits and Eggo waffles, and nobody saw the point of making biscuits from scratch when you could pop them from a can. Stand beside Grandma Edna's Pennsylvania Dutch kitchen table on December 25, 1973, and watch her slicing scrapple into thick slabs. Scrapple was a loaf of cooked pork scraps, cornmeal, and spices that she'd bought from the butcher for 50 cents a pound. She'd slice it half an inch thick and fry it in a cast-iron skillet until both sides were dark brown and crispy, with edges that crackled when you bit into them. Alongside the scrapple, she'd fry thick slices of apple in butter and brown sugar until they caramelized and turned soft. The scrapple cost almost nothing and fed 8 people. It tasted savory and slightly spicy, with a texture that was crispy outside and soft inside, like a cross between sausage and polenta. Walk into Grandma May's Kentucky kitchen on Christmas morning 1977 and watch her mixing Johnny cake batter in a crockery bowl. Johnny cakes were cornmeal pancakes made with just cornmeal, boiling water, salt, and a little lard stirred in. She'd drop spoonfuls onto a hot griddle greased with bacon fat, flattening them slightly with the back of the spoon. They cooked up crispy and lacy around the edges, dense and corny in the center. She'd serve them with sorghum syrup, a thick, dark molasses-like syrup made from sorghum cane that her neighbor grew and pressed every fall. The Johnny cakes cost 10 cents to make and fed 6 people. They tasted like pure corn, slightly sweet, with a toasty, almost nutty flavor from the griddle. The sorghum syrup was deep and complex, less sweet than maple syrup, with a mineral tang that made your mouth water. Johnny cakes disappeared by 1983 when Aunt Jemima pancake mix took over American breakfasts. Nobody wanted to make pancakes from scratch when you could add water to a box and be done. Sorghum syrup production collapsed, and most Americans forgot it ever existed. 5 breakfasts down, 45 more to go. Notice something? Every single one cost almost nothing. Every single one fed a crowd. Your grandmother woke up at 4 a.m. to make these. You hit snooze and grab a granola bar.
It's possible to make a meal in 20 minutes if, first, you're well-grounded in good kitchen techniques.
That's the difference. Stand in Grandma Clara's Ohio kitchen on December 25, 1975, and watch her making milk toast for the kids who were too excited to eat a heavy breakfast. She'd toast thick slices of homemade white bread until they were golden, then place them in shallow bowls. She'd heat whole milk on the stove with butter, sugar, and a pinch of salt until it was steaming but not boiling, then pour it over the toast. The bread soaked up the sweet milk and turned soft and custardy. She'd sprinkle the top with cinnamon sugar and serve it immediately. It cost 5 cents per serving and was meant to calm nervous stomachs before the big Christmas feast. It tasted like warm, sweet comfort, like drinking hot cereal, but better. The cinnamon sugar formed a slightly gritty layer on top that melted into the milk. Milk toast disappeared in the early 1980s when Pop-Tarts and toaster strudels convinced kids that breakfast should be frosted and filled with jam. Walk into Grandma Loretta's Georgia kitchen on Christmas morning 1978 and smell the hominy frying in bacon grease. She'd open 2 cans of white hominy, drain them, and press the kernels flat with the back of a fork. Then she'd fry them in hot bacon grease until they were crispy and golden, like little corn fritters. Alongside the hominy, she'd fry sausage patties she'd made herself from ground pork, sage, black pepper, and red pepper flakes. The hominy cost 25 cents and fed 8 people. It tasted like fried corn with a deep, smoky flavor from the bacon grease, with a texture that was crispy outside and chewy inside. The sausage was spicy and savory, with enough grease to soak into the hominy and make it even better. Fried hominy disappeared by 1984 when Americans stopped eating canned hominy and forgot it existed. Hominy became something only Mexican restaurants used for pozole, and the tradition of frying it for breakfast died completely. Stand beside Grandma Opal's Montana Ranch kitchen table on December 25, 1971, and watch her mixing buckwheat pancake batter. Buckwheat flour was darker and earthier than regular flour, with a nutty, almost bitter flavor. She'd mix it with buttermilk, eggs, baking soda, and a pinch of salt, then let it rest while the griddle heated. The pancakes cooked up thick and hearty, dark brown with a slightly sour tang from the buckwheat. She'd serve them with blackstrap molasses, the darkest, thickest molasses you could buy, so strong it made your face pucker. The pancakes cost 20 cents and fed 10 people. They tasted earthy and robust, nothing like the sweet, fluffy pancakes kids eat today. The molasses was intense, bitter, mineral-rich, with a deep, almost smoky sweetness. Walk into Grandma Betty's upstate New York kitchen on Christmas morning 1974 and watch her making SOS, creamed chipped beef on toast. She'd tear dried beef into strips and rinse it under cold water to remove some of the salt. Then she'd make a white sauce by melting butter, whisking in flour, and slowly adding milk until it thickened. The beef went into the sauce, turning it pale pink and salty. She'd ladle it over slices of toasted white bread. It cost 75 cents to make and fed 8 people. The beef was salty and chewy, with a concentrated meat flavor that bloomed in the creamy sauce. The toast soaked up the sauce and turned soft underneath while staying crispy on the edges. Creamed chipped beef disappeared by 1983, when dried beef stopped being sold in jars at grocery stores, and younger generations started calling it gross military food. The tradition died with the World War II generation who grew up eating it in the Army and brought it home to their families. Stand in Grandma Sophia's Italian-American kitchen in Boston on December 25, 1976, and watch her frying leftover bread dough in hot oil. She'd made bread dough the night before for Christmas dinner rolls, and there was always extra. On Christmas morning, she'd pinch off pieces of raw dough, stretch them flat, and drop them into a pot of bubbling vegetable oil. They'd puff up like little pillows, frying until golden and crispy. She'd drain them on paper towels and serve them hot with honey butter, softened butter whipped with honey until it was light and spreadable. The fried dough cost almost nothing and fed 12 people. It tasted like a cross between a donut and garlic bread, yeasty and rich, with a crispy shell and a soft, airy interior. The honey butter melted into the hot dough and soaked into every bite. Fried bread dough disappeared in the early 1980s when nobody made bread from scratch anymore. Frozen dinner rolls replaced homemade dough, and the tradition of frying the leftovers died with it. Walk into Grandma Iris's Michigan kitchen on Christmas morning 1979 and smell the oatmeal baking in the oven. This wasn't stovetop oatmeal. This was baked oatmeal, thick and dense like a cake. She'd mix rolled oats with milk, eggs, melted butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, and raisins, then pour it into a buttered casserole dish. The top baked into a caramelized brown sugar crust that cracked when you pressed a spoon into it. Underneath, the oatmeal was creamy and dense, almost like bread pudding. She'd serve it in squares with cold milk poured over the top. It cost 50 cents to make and fed 10 people. It tasted like oatmeal cookies in casserole form, sweet, buttery, with chewy raisins and a cinnamon warmth. The crust was the best part, crunchy and caramelized. Baked oatmeal disappeared by 1985 when instant oatmeal packets took over. Nobody wanted to wait 45 minutes for oatmeal when Quaker Instant took 90 seconds. Stand in Grandma Faye's Arkansas kitchen on December 25, 1972, and watch her making bacon gravy to pour over leftover cornbread. She'd fry a pound of bacon until it was crispy, then pour off most of the grease into a jar, leaving about 3 tablespoons in the skillet. She'd whisk flour into the hot grease, stirring until it turned golden, then slowly add milk. Whisking constantly until the gravy thickened, she'd season it with black pepper and salt, then crumble the cooked bacon back into the gravy. She'd split squares of cold cornbread from last night's dinner and pour the gravy over the top. It cost almost nothing and fed 8 people. The gravy was smoky, peppery, and rich, with chunks of bacon in every bite. Walk into Grandma Nina's kitchen in Minneapolis on Christmas morning, 1975, and watch her making cottage cheese pancakes. She'd mix cottage cheese with eggs, flour, a pinch of salt, and a little sugar, then whisk it into a thick batter that looked lumpy and strange. The pancakes cooked up thin and delicate, with little curds of cottage cheese visible throughout. She'd serve them with sour cream and a sprinkle of sugar, or sometimes with jam. They cost 30 cents to make and fed 6 people. They tasted tangy and rich, almost like crepes, but with a slight chewiness from the cottage cheese. The sour cream and sugar on top made them taste almost like dessert. Cottage cheese pancakes disappeared in the early 1980s when cottage cheese fell out of fashion and people started thinking it was diet food for old ladies. The recipe was lost when Eastern European grandmothers died and their daughters refused to learn it. Stand beside Grandma Pearl's Florida kitchen table on December 25, 1977, and watch her preparing baked grapefruit. She'd cut ruby red grapefruits in half, then use a serrated knife to separate each segment from the membrane. She'd sprinkle each half with a thick layer of brown sugar and a dot of butter, then place them under the broiler until the sugar melted and caramelized. The grapefruit came out hot and bubbling, with the sugar forming a crispy, candy-like crust on top. She'd serve them in bowls with a spoon. It cost 40 cents and fed 8 people. The grapefruit was tart and juicy, balanced by the sweet, buttery, caramelized sugar. It was breakfast and dessert at the same time. Baked grapefruit disappeared in the mid-1980s when kids refused to eat anything that wasn't frosted or chocolate. Mothers stopped making it because their children complained it was too sour, even with a half-inch of sugar on top. Walk into Grandma Essie's South Carolina kitchen on Christmas morning 1973 and watch her mixing cornmeal cakes. She'd stir yellow cornmeal with boiling water and a pinch of salt until it formed a thick paste, then let it cool slightly. She'd shape the mixture into flat patties with her hands and fry them in hot lard until they were crispy and golden on both sides. She'd serve them with sorghum molasses or cane syrup. The cakes cost 10 cents to make and fed 10 people. They tasted like fried cornbread without the sweetness, with a crispy crust and a dense, slightly gritty interior. The molasses soaked into the cakes and turned them sweet and rich. Fried cornmeal cakes disappeared by 1982 when people stopped eating cornmeal for breakfast and switched to sugary cereals. The tradition died with elderly black Southerners who remembered eating them during the Depression, and younger generations never learned to make them. 15. Christmas breakfasts erased. 35 left. These weren't just foods. They were traditions that meant something. Your grandmother didn't fry cornmeal cakes because she had to. She did it because Christmas morning deserved more than cereal from a box. Keep going. Stand in Grandma Greta's Pennsylvania German kitchen on December 25, 1978, and watch her grating potatoes for potato pancakes. She'd peel 6 large russet potatoes and grate them by hand on a box grater, then squeeze out the excess water through a kitchen towel. She'd mix the grated potatoes with 1 egg, a little flour, salt, and pepper, then fry spoonfuls in hot oil until they were crispy and golden. She'd serve them with homemade applesauce and sour cream. The pancakes cost 25 cents to make and fed 8 people. They tasted like hash browns, but better, crispy on the outside, soft and starchy on the inside, with a rich potato flavor. The applesauce was sweet and tangy, cutting through the oiliness of the fried potatoes. Potato pancakes disappeared in the mid-1980s when frozen hash browns hit grocery stores and nobody wanted to spend 30 minutes grating potatoes by hand. The tradition survived only in Jewish delis that served them as latkes during Hanukkah. Walk into Grandma Mabel's Nebraska kitchen on Christmas morning, 1971, and watch her preparing shredded wheat with baked milk. She'd place large shredded wheat biscuits in shallow bowls, then pour hot-baked milk over them. Baked milk was whole milk that had been baked in the oven for hours until it turned slightly caramelized and sweet with a thick skin on top. She'd sprinkle sugar and cinnamon over the cereal and serve it immediately. It cost 15 cents per serving and fed 6 people. The shredded wheat softened in the hot milk and turned into a warm, wheaty porridge. The baked milk tasted rich and slightly sweet, with a toasted flavor that regular milk didn't have. Baked milk disappeared completely by 1980 when nobody had time to bake milk for 3 hours just for breakfast. The tradition died with Russian and Eastern European immigrants, and most Americans have never heard of it. Stand beside Grandma Hazel's Indiana kitchen on December 25, 1974, and watch her slicing yesterday's leftover cornmeal mush. She'd made the mush the night before by boiling cornmeal until it was thick, then pouring it into a loaf pan to set. On Christmas morning, she'd slice it into thick rectangles and fry them in butter until both sides were golden and crispy. She'd serve them with real maple syrup and sometimes a side of fried eggs. The mush cost 10 cents to make and fed 8 people. It tasted like fried polenta, crispy and buttery on the outside, soft and creamy on the inside, with a deep corn flavor. The maple syrup soaked into the mush and made it sweet and rich. Fried mush disappeared by 1983 when instant grits and oatmeal replaced all traditional cornmeal breakfast dishes. Nobody wanted to cook mush the night before just to fry it the next morning. Walk into Grandma Mavis's Tennessee Mountain Kitchen on Christmas morning, 1976, and smell salt pork frying in a cast-iron skillet. Salt pork was a slab of cured pork belly that she'd slice thin and fry until it was crispy like bacon but saltier and fattier. After the pork was done, she'd pour strong black coffee into the hot grease, stirring and scraping up all the brown bits. The coffee and grease combined into red-eye gravy, a thin, dark gravy with a sheen of oil on top. She'd serve the salt pork and gravy over biscuits. It cost 50 cents and fed 10 people. The salt pork was intensely salty and fatty, melting in your mouth. The red-eye gravy was bitter from the coffee, salty from the pork grease, and slightly sweet. Salt pork and red-eye gravy disappeared by 1985 when grocery stores stopped selling salt pork, and younger Southerners decided it was too greasy and unhealthy. Stand in Grandma Vivian's California kitchen on December 25, 1979, and watch her making cinnamon toast casserole. She'd cube an entire loaf of day-old white bread and layer it in a buttered casserole dish. Then she'd whisk together eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and cinnamon, and pour it over the bread. The bread soaked up the custard overnight in the refrigerator. On Christmas morning, she'd bake it until it puffed up and turned golden on top, with crispy edges and a custardy center. She'd dust it with powdered sugar and serve it with syrup. It cost $1 to make and fed 12 people. It tasted like French toast in casserole form, sweet, cinnamon-scented, custardy with crunchy caramelized edges. Cinnamon toast casserole disappeared in the mid-1980s when it was rebranded as French toast bake and sold in expensive brunch restaurants for $15 a plate. Walk into Grandma Bertha's North Carolina kitchen on Christmas morning, 1972, and watch her slicing liver mush. Liver mush was a loaf made from pork liver, cornmeal, and spices sold at the butcher shop for 30 cents a pound. She'd slice it half an inch thick and fry it in a hot skillet until both sides were dark and crispy. She'd serve it with eggs and biscuits, It cost almost nothing and fed 8 people. Liver mush tasted rich and iron-heavy, with a texture that was crispy outside and soft inside, like a cross between scrapple and liverwurst. Stand beside Grandma Agnes's Wisconsin dairy farm kitchen on December 25, 1975, and watch her stirring oatmeal on the stove. This wasn't quick oats. This was steel-cut oats that took 30 minutes of constant stirring. She'd cook them in whole milk instead of water, adding a pinch of salt. When the oats were thick and creamy, she'd stir in raisins and a spoonful of brown sugar. She'd serve it in bowls with a pour of heavy cream on top. It cost 20 cents per serving and fed 10 people. The oatmeal was thick, creamy, and rich, with a nutty flavor from the steel-cut oats. The raisins plumped up and turned sweet. The cream formed a cold, rich layer on top that mixed into the hot oatmeal. Steel-cut oatmeal disappeared in the early 1980s when instant oatmeal took over. Nobody wanted to stand at the stove for 30 minutes when Quaker Instant was ready in 90 seconds. Walk into Grandma Linda's Texas kitchen on Christmas morning 1978 and smell sausage balls baking in the oven. She'd mix raw breakfast sausage with biscuit and shredded cheddar cheese, then roll the mixture into walnut-sized balls. They baked until golden and crispy on the outside, juicy and savory on the inside. She'd serve them hot with honey for dipping. They cost $1.50 to make and fed 12 people. The sausage balls were rich, cheesy, and slightly spicy, with crispy browned bits on the outside. The honey was the perfect contrast, sweet and floral against the salty, savory sausage. Sausage balls didn't disappear entirely, but they stopped being a Christmas breakfast tradition in the mid-1980s when people started serving them as party appetizers instead. The recipe survived, but the ritual of eating them on Christmas morning with honey, that died. Grandma Linda stopped making them in 1986 when her kids told her they wanted donuts instead. Stand in Grandma Edith's Missouri kitchen on December 25, 1973, and watch her making creamed eggs. She'd hard-boil a dozen eggs, peel them, and chop them roughly. Then she'd make a thick white sauce with butter, flour, and milk, seasoning it with salt, pepper, and a pinch of paprika. The chopped eggs went into the sauce, and the whole mixture got ladled over slices of toasted white bread. It cost 40 cents to make and fed 8 people. The eggs were tender and mild, suspended in a rich, creamy sauce. The toast soaked up the sauce and turned soft on the bottom, staying crispy on the edges. Creamed eggs disappeared by 1982 when people decided white food was bland and started demanding everything be covered in cheese or hot sauce. Walk into Grandma Nell's Virginia kitchen on Christmas morning 1977 and watch her frying apples in bacon grease. She'd fry thick slices of bacon until crispy, then remove them from the skillet. In the hot bacon grease, she'd fry thick slices of tart apples, Granny Smiths or wine saps, until they were golden and soft. She'd sprinkle them with brown sugar and cinnamon, letting the sugar caramelize in the bacon fat. She'd serve the apples alongside the bacon and biscuits. It cost 50 cents and fed 8 people. The apples were sweet, tangy, and smoky from the bacon grease, with a caramelized crust. Stand beside Grandma Ruby's Mississippi kitchen on December 25, 1974, and watch her stirring grits in a pot. She'd use stone-ground grits, not instant, and cook them slowly in water with a generous pinch of salt. She'd stir them constantly for 30 minutes until they were thick, creamy, and smooth. She'd serve them in bowls with a pat of butter melting on top and more salt. That's it. No cheese, no sugar, no toppings, just grits, butter, and salt. It cost 10 cents per serving and fed 10 people. The grits were creamy and rich, with a corn flavor that was subtle and earthy. The butter melted into golden pools. Plain grits disappeared by 1983 when people decided grits were boring and started adding cheese, bacon, and shrimp. Walk into Grandma Joyce's Ohio kitchen on Christmas morning 1976 and smell bologna frying in a skillet. She'd slice thick rounds of bologna, the kind that came in a chub from the butcher, and fry them until the edges curled up and the center puffed like a bowl. The bologna got crispy and caramelized with a savory, slightly smoky flavor. She'd scramble eggs in the same skillet, letting them soak up the bologna grease. She'd serve the bologna and eggs with toast. It cost 75 cents and fed 6 people. The bologna tasted rich and salty, with crispy edges and a juicy center. The eggs were fluffy and savory from the bologna fat. Fried bologna and eggs disappeared in the mid-1980s when people decided bologna was cheap and low class. Oscar Mayer stopped making thick-sliced bologna, and the tradition died with working-class grandmothers who weren't ashamed to fry it. Stand in Grandma Esther's West Virginia kitchen on December 25, 1975, and watch her spreading apple butter on hot biscuits. Apple butter was a thick, dark spread made by cooking apples down with sugar and spices for hours until they turned into a concentrated jam-like paste. She'd made it in the fall and canned it in jars. On Christmas morning, she'd bake buttermilk biscuits from scratch and serve them hot with apple butter. It cost almost nothing and fed 10 people. The biscuits were fluffy, buttery, and tender. The apple butter was intensely sweet and spiced with flavors of cinnamon, cloves, and concentrated apples. Apple butter on biscuits disappeared in the early 1980s when grocery stores stopped selling apple butter and younger generations had never heard of it. The tradition died with Appalachian grandmothers who remembered making it in giant copper kettles over outdoor fires. Walk into Grandma Catherine's main kitchen on Christmas morning 1979 and watch her making codfish cakes. She'd soak salt cod overnight to remove the salt, then flake it into pieces. She'd mix the cod with mashed potatoes, an egg, pepper, and a little flour, then shape the mixture into patties. She'd fry them in butter until they were golden and crispy on both sides. She'd serve them with poached eggs on top. It cost $1 to make and fed 8 people. The codfish cakes were salty, savory, and slightly fishy, with a crispy crust and a fluffy potato interior. The poached eggs broke open and ran over the cakes, turning them rich and creamy. Codfish cakes disappeared by 1985 when salt cod stopped being sold in grocery stores, and younger New Englanders decided eating fish for breakfast was weird. Stand beside Grandma Martha's Vermont kitchen on December 25, 1972, and watch her making hasty pudding. Hasty pudding was cornmeal cooked in boiling water until it turned into a thick porridge similar to polenta. She'd cook it slowly, stirring constantly, until it was smooth and creamy. She'd serve it in bowls with real maple syrup and a pat of butter. It cost 5 cents per serving and fed 10 people. The pudding was warm, slightly sweet from the corn, with a texture that was creamy and comforting. The maple syrup soaked into the porridge and made it rich and sweet. Hasty pudding disappeared by 1980 when instant oatmeal and cream of wheat took over hot breakfast cereals. The name hasty pudding became something people only heard about in colonial history books, and nobody remembered it was just cornmeal mush with a fancy name. 30. Christmas breakfasts erased, 20 more to go. Every single one of these was made by hand. Every single one cost less than $1. Every single one fed a family. Your grandmother knew how to do all of this. You know how to use DoorDash. That's the difference between her generation and yours. Now let's finish this, because the last 20 will show you exactly what you lost. Walk into Grandma Lucille's Alabama kitchen on Christmas morning 1977 and watch her making salmon croquettes from canned salmon. She'd open a can of pink salmon, drain it, and pick out the bones and skin, though some grandmothers left the bones in because they were soft and full of calcium. She'd mix the salmon with an egg, saltine cracker crumbs, a little flour, diced onion and black pepper, then shape the mixture into thick patties. The patties went into a hot skillet with bacon grease, frying until both sides were golden brown and crispy. The salmon croquettes had a crispy, crunchy crust and a soft, flaky interior with little pockets of onion throughout. She'd serve them alongside a bowl of creamy white grits with butter. The salmon cost 60 cents per can, and one can made 8 croquettes that fed 6 people. The grits cost almost nothing. The croquettes tasted savory and slightly fishy, with a rich, oily flavor from the salmon and the bacon grease. Stand beside Grandma Anya's kitchen in New York City on December 25, 1973, and watch her cooking buckwheat groats, kasha, in a pot on the stove. Kasha was toasted buckwheat kernels, dark brown and nutty-smelling, that she'd bought from the Jewish grocery store on the Lower East Side. She'd cook the kasha in boiling salted water until the grains were tender, but still slightly chewy. While it cooked, she'd fry sliced onions in a ridiculous amount of butter until they were soft, golden, and caramelized. The onions went into the cooked kasha, along with more butter, and she'd stir everything together until the grains glistened with fat. She'd serve the kasha in bowls, sometimes with a fried egg on top, sometimes plain. It cost 25 cents to make and fed 8 people. Kasha tasted earthy, nutty, and rich, with a texture that was somewhere between rice and oatmeal. Walk into Grandma Hazel's Indiana kitchen on Christmas morning 1974 and watch her making fried mush sandwiches. She'd made cornmeal mush the night before, boiling cornmeal in water until it was thick and smooth, then pouring it into a loaf pan to set overnight. On Christmas morning, she'd slice the firm mush into half-inch slabs and fry them in butter until both sides were golden and crispy, with edges that shattered when you bit into them. Then she'd make sandwiches by stacking 2 slices of fried mush with a slice of fried ham in between. She'd serve the sandwiches with maple syrup drizzled on top. The mush cost 10 cents to make. The ham cost 50 cents. And it fed 8 people. The fried mush was crispy on the outside, creamy and dense on the inside, with a deep corn flavor. The ham was salty and smoky, and the maple syrup tied everything together. Stand in Grandma Ingrid's Minnesota Scandinavian kitchen on December 25, 1978, and watch her serving pickled herring for breakfast. She'd buy jars of herring pickled in vinegar and onions from the Scandinavian market, or sometimes she'd pickle her own, using fresh herring, white vinegar, sugar, onions, and pickling spices. On Christmas morning, she'd drain the herring and arrange the fillets on a plate with slices of dense, dark rye bread, sliced onions, and boiled potatoes. Some families added sour cream on the side. The herring cost $1.50 per jar and fed 10 people when stretched with bread and potatoes. Pickled herring tasted sour, salty, and fishy, with a firm, meaty texture. Walk into Grandma Daisy's Kentucky kitchen on Christmas morning 1975 and smell corn fritters frying in hot oil. She'd mix canned corn kernels with flour, an egg, a little sugar, baking powder, and salt, then drop spoonfuls of the batter into a pot of bubbling oil. The fritters puffed up and turned golden brown, crispy on the outside with little bits of corn visible throughout. She'd drain them on paper towels and serve them hot with honey drizzled on top. Sometimes she'd dust them with powdered sugar. The corn fritters cost 40 cents to make and fed 10 people. They tasted sweet and savory at the same time. The corn was slightly sweet, the batter was tender and fluffy, and the fried exterior was crispy and rich. stand beside Grandma Nora's Oklahoma kitchen on December 25th, 1976, and watch her making milk gravy to pour over fried potatoes. She'd peel and dice russet potatoes into small cubes, then fry them in bacon grease until they were golden brown and crispy. While the potatoes fried, she'd make milk gravy by whisking flour into hot bacon grease, letting it cook until golden, then slowly adding milk and stirring until the gravy thickened. She'd season it heavily with black pepper and salt. The fried potatoes went into bowls, and the hot milk gravy got ladled on top. Sometimes she'd crumble leftover biscuits into the bowl before adding the gravy. The potatoes cost 15 cents, the milk cost 10 cents, and it fed 8 people. The fried potatoes were crispy outside and fluffy inside, rich from the bacon grease. Walk into Grandma Hattie's main kitchen on Christmas morning 1971 and smell baked beans that had been cooking overnight in the oven. She'd soak dried navy beans the day before, then layer them in a bean pot with chunks of salt pork, molasses, brown sugar, dry mustard, and onions. The pot went into a low oven, 250 degrees, and cooked for 8 hours while the family slept. By Christmas morning, the beans were tender and creamy. The salt pork had melted into the beans, and the molasses had caramelized into a thick, dark sauce. She'd serve the beans in bowls with brown bread on the side, dense, sweet bread made with molasses and rye flour, steamed in a can. The beans cost 50 cents to make and fed 12 people. They tasted sweet, smoky, and rich, with the salt pork adding a deep, fatty flavor. The molasses gave them a dark, almost bitter sweetness that balanced the saltiness of the pork. The brown bread was dense and slightly sweet, perfect for soaking up the bean juice. 35 traditions erased, 15 more ahead. Your grandmother knew how to make something out of nothing: cornmeal, bacon grease, day-old bread, canned fish. You know how to use DoorDash. That's not progress. That's surrender. Let's finish this. Walk into Grandma Wanda's Arkansas kitchen on Christmas morning 1979 and watch her pulling a sausage gravy biscuit pie out of the oven. She'd press raw biscuit dough into the bottom of a pie pan, then pour sausage gravy, made by browning sausage, making a flour roux in the grease and adding milk over the dough. The whole thing baked in the oven until the biscuit crust was golden and the gravy was bubbling. She'd slice it into wedges like a pie and serve it hot. Stand beside Grandma Agnes's Boston kitchen on December 25th, 1973, and watch her making creamed codfish. She'd soak salt cod overnight to remove the salt, then flake it into pieces. She'd boil peeled potatoes until tender, then drain them and keep them warm. Meanwhile, she'd make a thick white sauce with butter, flour, and milk, then stir the flaked codfish into the sauce. The creamed codfish got ladled over the boiled potatoes, and she'd sprinkle the top with paprika and fresh parsley. The salt cod cost 75 cents, the potatoes cost 20 cents, and it fed 10 people. The codfish was salty, tender, and flaky, suspended in a rich, creamy sauce. The potatoes were bland and starchy, the perfect base to soak up the sauce and balance the strong fish flavor. The paprika added a little color and a hint of smokiness. It was a breakfast that kept you full all day, heavy, hearty, and satisfying. Walk into Grandma Loretta's Georgia kitchen on Christmas morning, 1978, and watch her frying canned hominy in bacon grease. She'd drain 2 cans of white hominy and dump the kernels directly into a hot cast-iron skillet with bacon grease. The hominy fried until the kernels were golden and crispy on the outside, with some kernels popping open like popcorn. She'd crack eggs directly into the skillet with the hominy, letting the eggs fry in the same grease, then scramble everything together. The eggs and hominy mixed into a savory, crispy, satisfying breakfast. 40 breakfasts gone, 10 more left. Do you see what happened? These weren't just recipes. They were survival. They were culture. They were memory. Your grandmother knew how to make something out of nothing. You know how to order Uber Eats. That's not an upgrade, that's a loss. Now here are the last 10, the ones that hurt the most. Walk into Grandma Edna's Pennsylvania Dutch kitchen on Christmas morning 1973 and watch her preparing the most traditional Dutch breakfast, scrapple with fried eggs and apple butter. Scrapple was a loaf made from pork scraps, organ meats, cornmeal, and spices, pressed into a loaf and sold at the butcher shop for 50 cents a pound. It was gray-brown, dense, and intimidating if you didn't grow up eating it. She'd slice the scrapple half an inch thick and fry it in a hot cast-iron skillet until both sides were dark brown and crispy, with edges that crackled when you bit into them. The key was to get it crispy. If you didn't fry it long enough, it was mushy and unappetizing. While the scrapple fried, she'd fry eggs in the same skillet, letting the eggs soak up the scrapple grease. The eggs came out with lacy, crispy edges and runny yolks. She'd serve the scrapple and eggs on a plate with a generous dollop of apple butter on the side. Stand beside Grandma Lillian's Vermont kitchen on December 25, 1975, and watch her making red flannel hash from leftover Christmas Eve dinner. Red flannel hash was made from leftover corned beef, boiled potatoes, and beets, all chopped together and fried in a cast-iron skillet until crispy. The beets turned everything pink, hence the name red flannel, and gave the hash a sweet, earthy flavor that balanced the salty corned beef. She'd dice the cold corned beef into small cubes, chop the boiled potatoes and beets into similar-sized pieces, then mix everything together with diced onions. The mixture went into a hot skillet with butter, and she'd press it down firmly with a spatula, letting it cook undisturbed until the bottom formed a crispy, golden-brown crust. Then she'd flip it in sections, letting the other side crisp up too. While the hash cooked, she'd poach eggs in simmering water with a splash of vinegar. The poached eggs went on top of the hash, and when you cut into them, the runny yolks broke open and ran through the crispy potatoes, beets, and corned beef. Walk into Grandma May's Kentucky farmhouse kitchen on Christmas morning 1977 and watch her making cornmeal pancakes with sorghum butter. These weren't regular pancakes. They were made with stone-ground yellow cornmeal, giving them a texture and flavor that was completely different from wheat flour pancakes. She'd mix cornmeal with buttermilk, an egg, a little flour, baking soda, and salt, then let the batter rest for 10 minutes so the cornmeal could absorb the liquid and soften. The batter was thicker than regular pancake batter, almost like polenta. She'd ladle the batter onto a hot griddle greased with bacon fat, and the pancakes cooked up thick and hearty, with a golden-brown crust and a dense, slightly gritty interior. They didn't rise like fluffy wheat pancakes. They stayed flat and substantial. While the pancakes cooked, she'd make sorghum butter by whipping softened butter with dark sorghum syrup until it was light and fluffy. Sorghum syrup was made from sorghum cane that her neighbor grew and pressed every fall. It was thick, dark, and intensely flavored, less sweet than maple syrup, with a mineral, almost molasses-like taste. Stand in Grandma Fay's Arkansas kitchen on December 25, 1972, and watch her making milk gravy to pour over fried cornbread. She'd start by making cornbread the night before, a simple batter of cornmeal, buttermilk, an egg, baking powder, and salt, baked in a cast-iron skillet until golden. On Christmas morning, she'd slice the leftover cornbread into thick wedges and fry them in bacon grease until both sides were crispy and golden brown. The fried cornbread went onto plates, and then she'd make the gravy. Milk gravy was simple. She'd leave about 3 tablespoons of bacon grease in the skillet, sprinkle in flour, and whisk it constantly until it turned golden brown. Then she'd slowly pour in cold milk, whisking constantly to prevent lumps, and cook the gravy until it thickened into a pale, creamy sauce. She'd season it heavily with black pepper and a little salt. Walk into Grandma Bertha's North Carolina kitchen on Christmas morning 1976 and watch her frying liver and onions for breakfast. Yes, liver for breakfast. It sounds strange now, but in the 1970s, liver was considered a health food, rich in iron, cheap to buy, and filling. She'd buy beef liver from the butcher for 40 cents a pound, slice it thin, and soak it in milk for an hour to remove the bitter taste. On Christmas morning, she'd drain the liver, pat it dry, and dredge it in seasoned flour. The liver went into a hot cast-iron skillet with bacon grease, frying quickly. While the liver fried, she'd fry sliced onions in the same skillet until they were soft, golden, and caramelized. She'd also fry diced potatoes in more bacon grease until they were crispy and golden. The liver, onions, and potatoes all went onto plates together. Stand beside Grandma Astrid's Minnesota Scandinavian kitchen on December 25, 1974, and watch her preparing fried salt herring for Christmas breakfast. Salt herring was a staple in Scandinavian American homes. Cheap, long-lasting, and traditional. She'd buy whole salt herring from the Scandinavian market, soak them in cold water overnight to remove the salt, then fillet them, removing the bones and skin. On Christmas morning, she'd dredge the herring fillets in flour and fry them in butter until they were golden and crispy on both sides. The herring went onto plates alongside boiled potatoes, sliced raw onions, and sometimes a dollop of sour cream. The herring cost 50 cents and fed 10 people when stretched with potatoes. Fried salt herring tasted salty, fishy, and rich, with a firm, meaty texture. The flour coating turned crispy and golden, giving the fish a satisfying crunch. The boiled potatoes were bland and starchy, the perfect base to balance the intense saltiness of the herring. You'd eat a bite of herring, a bite of potato, a bite of raw onion, and the combination was perfect. Salty, creamy, sharp, and satisfying. Fried salt herring for breakfast disappeared by 1983 when younger Scandinavian Americans decided eating fish for breakfast was weird and too ethnic. They wanted bacon and eggs, not herring and potatoes. Scandinavian markets closed as the immigrant generation died off, and salt herring stopped being sold in American grocery stores. Grandma Astrid stopped making it in 1980 when her grandchildren refused to eat it, covering their noses and leaving the table. By 1990, the tradition of eating fried salt herring on Christmas morning had died completely, surviving only in isolated pockets of Minnesota and Wisconsin, where elderly Scandinavians still remembered the old ways. 45. Christmas breakfasts are lost forever. 5 left. These recipes didn't die because they tasted bad. They died because we stopped caring. We let convenience win. We chose frozen waffles over our grandmother's memories. Here are the last 5. They hurt the most. Walk into Grandma Ruby's Mississippi kitchen on Christmas morning 1978 and watch her frying chicken livers for breakfast. Chicken livers were cheap, sometimes free if you bought a whole chicken and saved the livers that came inside. She'd rinse the livers, pat them dry, and dredge them in seasoned flour mixed with black pepper, salt, and a little cayenne. The livers went into a hot cast-iron skillet with bacon grease, frying quickly until they were crispy on the outside but still slightly pink and creamy inside. If you cooked them too long, they turned dry and chalky. After the livers were done, she'd make gravy in the same skillet by whisking flour into the hot grease, then slowly adding milk and stirring until the gravy thickened. The fried livers went back into the gravy, and the whole thing got served over biscuits or rice. The chicken livers cost almost nothing, maybe 25 cents if you bought them separately, and fed 8 people. They tasted rich, iron-heavy, and slightly gamey, with a creamy texture that melted in your mouth when cooked correctly. The gravy was thick, peppery, and savory, soaking into the biscuits and making them soft and rich. It was a breakfast that filled you up and gave you energy all day. Cheap, nutritious, and satisfying. Stand in Grandma Loretta's Georgia kitchen on December 25th, 1979, and watch her making fried hominy cakes with sausage gravy. She'd open 2 cans of white hominy, drain them thoroughly, then mash the kernels with a potato masher until they were mostly broken down, but still had some texture. She'd mix the mashed hominy with an egg, a little flour, salt, and pepper, then shape the mixture into flat patties like thick pancakes. The hominy cakes went into a hot skillet with bacon grease, frying until both sides were golden brown and crispy, with lacy edges that crackled when you bit into them. While the hominy cakes fried, she'd make sausage gravy by browning a pound of breakfast sausage, sprinkling flour into the grease, and slowly adding milk, while whisking constantly. The gravy thickened into a pale peppery sauce, studded with crumbles of sausage. The fried hominy cakes went onto plates, and the sausage gravy got ladled on top, soaking into the cakes and turning them rich and savory. Walk into Grandma Dorothy's Ohio farm kitchen on Christmas morning 1975 and watch her making corn oysters, not actual oysters, but fritters made from corn that were shaped and fried to resemble oysters. She'd scrape fresh corn kernels off the cob in the summer and freeze them, or she'd use canned corn in the winter. She'd mix the corn with beaten eggs, a little flour, salt, and pepper, then drop spoonfuls of the batter into hot oil. The fritters puffed up and turned golden brown, crispy on the outside with little bits of corn visible throughout. They looked vaguely like fried oysters, hence the name. She'd drain the corn oysters on paper towels and serve them hot with real maple syrup drizzled on top. Some families ate them with butter and salt instead, treating them as a savory side dish. But on Christmas morning, Grandma Dorothy always served them sweet with syrup. The corn oysters cost 30 cents to make and fed 10 people. They tasted sweet and savory at the same time. The corn was naturally sweet, the batter was tender and eggy, and the fried exterior was crispy and rich. The maple syrup soaked into the hot fritters and made them sticky and sweet, like eating corn fritters and pancakes at the same time. They were crispy outside, soft and custardy inside, with bursts of corn in every bite. Stand beside Grandma Sophia's Italian-American kitchen in Boston on December 25th, 1977, and watch her making fried bread with cinnamon sugar and coffee milk for the kids. She'd made bread dough the night before for Christmas dinner rolls, and there was always extra. On Christmas morning, she'd pinch off pieces of raw dough, flatten them slightly, and drop them into a pot of bubbling vegetable oil. The dough puffed up immediately, frying until golden brown and crispy on the outside, soft and airy on the inside. She'd drain the fried bread on paper towels, then toss the hot pieces in a bowl of cinnamon sugar while they were still warm. The sugar stuck to the oily surface and formed a sweet, gritty crust. While the kids ate the fried bread, she'd make coffee milk, a Rhode Island and Massachusetts tradition that most of America has never heard of. Coffee milk was made by stirring coffee syrup into cold whole milk until it turned tan and sweet. Coffee syrup was thick, dark, and intensely coffee-flavored, made by boiling coffee with sugar until it reduced into syrup. The coffee milk was sweet, creamy, and slightly bitter, with a coffee flavor that was strong but not overwhelming. The fried bread cost almost nothing, and the coffee milk cost maybe 10 cents per glass. It fed 12 people. The fried bread tasted like a cross between a donut and garlic bread, yeasty, rich, slightly oily, with a crispy shell and a soft, airy interior. Yeasty, rich, slightly oily, with a crispy shell and a soft, airy interior. The cinnamon sugar added sweetness and spice. The coffee milk was the perfect accompaniment, cold, sweet, and creamy, cutting through the richness of the fried bread. 50 Christmas breakfasts, 50 traditions erased, 50 pieces of your grandmother's memory gone. These weren't just recipes, they were survival strategies. They were cultural identity. They were the knowledge that you could make something delicious out of almost nothing. Cornmeal, salt pork, bacon grease, day-old bread, canned fish, organ meats. Your grandmother knew how to turn poverty into abundance. She knew how to make Christmas feel special even when there was no money. She knew how to cook. You don't. And that's not entirely your fault. Corporations spent billions of dollars convincing you that cooking was too hard, too time-consuming, too old-fashioned. They sold you frozen waffles, instant oatmeal, Pop-Tarts, breakfast sandwiches you heat in the microwave for 60 seconds. They told you convenience was progress. They lied. What really happened was this. Your grandmother's knowledge was stolen. Her recipes were dismissed as too complicated or too gross or too poor. Her traditions were erased in favor of shelf-stable products that made corporations rich. And now, 2 generations later, you don't know how to make scrapple or fry hominy or bake oatmeal or press bread dough into a waffle iron. You lost all of it.